They didn't march into Hollywood with banners. They didn't write manifestos. They didn't even try to rebel. And yet Hollywood bent. These were not the revolutionaries we usually celebrate. They didn't challenge the system with fists raised high. Instead, they walked onto sets with quiet intentions, took roles others wouldn't dare, made choices that felt personal, not political. And somehow, those moments rippled into something irreversible. A young actor who mumbled through his lines and made the old guard abandon theatrics. A foreign actress who followed her heart and shattered the moral contracts of the studio era. A beauty queen with a brain so sharp, her off-screen invention would later become the backbone of modern communication. These stories don't shout. They hum beneath the golden age of cinema, in the background noise that changed the very language of fame, power, and image. Some changed the rules by refusing to fit the mold. Others changed it by breaking down in public. A few just happened to be there, in the wrong place or right moment, and history rewrote itself around them. They didn't mean to change the rules, but the rules were changed nonetheless. Which of these stars, in your opinion, didn't seek legacy, but became one anyway? 1. Marlon Brando, the man who made stillness loud. When Marlon Brando arrived in Hollywood, no one expected a revolution. He didn't speak loudly, didn't exaggerate emotions, didn't play to the balcony. He whispered, he mumbled, he looked away when others stared down the camera, and suddenly, the entire foundation of screen acting felt outdated. His performance in A Streetcar Named Desire wasn't just raw, it was disruptive. It made seasoned actors look artificial. Directors who had built careers on grandiose theatrics now found themselves chasing the quiet hurricane that Brando embodied. And it wasn't just technique, it was attitude. He refused studio grooming, hated press tours, and ignored the machinery of stardom. Brando didn't invent method acting, but he made it feel like a living organism. Audiences weren't watching a performance, they were witnessing something erupt. And even when he sabotaged his own trajectory, Hollywood never recovered from his presence. After Brando, vulnerability was no longer weakness, it was currency. He wasn't trying to change acting, but he made everything that came before him feel fake. 2. Hedy Lamarr, the face that invented the future. Hedy Lamarr was labeled the most beautiful woman in the world, and that was all Hollywood wanted her to be. They gave her veils, shadows, seductive glances, but never voice. What they didn't know was that behind the face was a mind restless with invention. In the early 1940 seconds, while America watched her glide across screens in silk gowns, Hedy was co-developing a frequency-hopping system to prevent enemy torpedoes from being jammed. The technology, ignored by the military at the time, would later become foundational for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. She didn't fight for recognition, she didn't even seek it. She just wanted to help. But Hollywood never forgave her for being more than beautiful. Her career faded, her contributions forgotten until decades later, and even now, her name appears in two histories that rarely intersect. One of glamour, one of genius. She wasn't trying to change how the world saw women, but by being both muse and mind, she shattered the boundary. Sidney Poitier, the stillness that shook the room. Sidney Poitier didn't protest with signs or speeches. He didn't shout. He stood, tall, calm, uncompromising. In an era when black actors were offered roles as maids, clowns, or criminals, Poitier simply said, no. What shook Hollywood wasn't just his talent, it was his restraint. In Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Lilies of the Field, and In the Heat of the Night, he portrayed dignity without needing to declare it. His characters didn't demand space, they occupied it with grace, making it impossible to ignore. Poitier's refusal to bend created a vacuum, roles rewritten, scripts reevaluated, casting practices rethought. He wasn't asking for the industry to change. He was embodying what it would look like when it did. He didn't plan to break barriers, but he made the old ones look so small, they became laughable. 4. Ingrid Bergman, Exile for Love. She had the face of an angel, the accent of elegance, and the blessings of every major studio. Ingrid Bergman was untouchable until she wasn't. When she fell in love with director Roberto Rossellini, while still married, and bore his child, America turned. The Senate condemned her. Studios erased her. Fan clubs burned her photos. She was branded a disgrace to womanhood. But Bergman never fought back. She didn't campaign to clear her name. She simply kept acting across Europe, in films that would define neo-realism. Years later, Hollywood would beg her to return, awarding her an Oscar for Anastasia, a quiet apology cloaked in gold. Bergman didn't intend to challenge moral double standards, but in choosing personal truth over public image, she forced Hollywood to confront its hypocrisy. Grace Kelly, the queen who walked away. Grace Kelly had it all: a meteoric rise, Hitchcock's devotion, the studio's obsession. She was the blonde, ideal, icy, yet tender, composed yet captivating. And then, at the height of her fame, she vanished. Her marriage to Prince Rainier of Monaco stunned the industry. She left Hollywood not in disgrace, but in silk and diamonds. Yet her absence echoed louder than her presence. Studios tried to replicate her aura and failed. Actresses were cast in the Grace Kelly mold, a mold she had shattered simply by stepping outside of it. She didn't intend to define what Hollywood royalty meant, but by leaving, she made it mythic. Anthony Perkins, the man who couldn't escape the mirror. Before Psycho, villains were loud, grotesque, obvious. Anthony Perkins changed that with a whisper. His Norman Bates wasn't a monster in the dark, he was a polite young man in daylight, and that made him unforgettable. Perkins didn't want to become the face of psychological horror. He was a sensitive, intelligent actor with Broadway roots and a soft-spoken demeanor. But Hitchcock saw something different, a duality, and the world saw it too. After Psycho, the blueprint for horror villains changed. Charming, lonely, broken. Perkins paid the price. Hollywood boxed him in. The range he once displayed disappeared beneath the shadow of the Bates Motel. Yet that same shadow created an archetype, one still used today in every killer who seems too normal to be dangerous. He wasn't chasing horror, but horror never stopped chasing him. 7. James Dean, the fire that didn't last long enough. James Dean made only 3 films. That was all it took. He didn't want to be the voice of a generation. He just wanted to act with urgency, with truth, with every fiber. In Rebel Without a Cause, he didn't play a teenager. He inhabited the ache of being one. His characters weren't written to start movements, but they ignited them anyway. After his death, too young and too sudden, he became what Hollywood hadn't planned for. A symbol. Dean's image, messy hair, slouched shoulders, cigarette-like punctuation was immortalized before it could evolve. And because it couldn't grow, it couldn't die. He wasn't trying to define youth, but he became its ghost. 8. Charlie Chaplin, the comedian who spoke without sound. He waddled, he twirled a cane, he wore a mustache that would later be cursed by history. But before that, Charlie Chaplin became the most recognizable man on earth, not by shouting, but by remaining silent. The Little Tramp was more than a character. He was an act of rebellion disguised as comedy. Chaplin's films spoke of poverty, power, war, and loneliness without a single word. In modern times, he fought industrial dehumanization with a wrench and a song. In The Great Dictator, he broke the silence and shattered the illusion that laughter must stay light. Chaplin never set out to be political, but as the world changed, his refusal to look away made him dangerous. He was exiled, surveilled, misunderstood. He just wanted people to laugh, but he taught them how to think. 9. Barbra Streisand, the face they didn't see coming. When Barbra Streisand emerged, Hollywood didn't know what to do with her. She didn't look like a star, at least not by the standards of the day. Her nose was wrong, her voice too powerful, her presence too uncontainable. She refused to alter her face, refused to shrink her ambition. And the world responded not just by listening, but by rearranging what beauty and charisma meant. Funny Girl wasn't just a musical, it was a declaration. You didn't have to fit the mold to break the box office. Over time, Streisand became a producer, director, icon. She didn't start with a campaign to change anything. She simply insisted on being herself. And that, somehow, became revolutionary. She wasn't trying to redefine beauty, but she made unconventional feel inevitable. 10. Bruce Lee, the hero who kicked down the frame. Bruce Lee wasn't cast to change the world. In fact, he was barely cast at all. Hollywood offered him sidekicks, stereotypes, scraps, so he left. In Hong Kong, Lee created a new language of cinema, one that blended philosophy, discipline, and raw impact. When America finally paid attention, it was too late. He had already become a legend. And then, he was gone. His death turned Enter the Dragon into a tombstone, but his legacy lived on. Action films were never the same. Neither was the face of heroism. Lee wasn't just fast, he wasn't just strong. He was the first Asian actor to headline a global phenomenon and be remembered not for being Asian, but for being unstoppable. He didn't demand to be the hero, but he made it impossible to cast one without thinking of him. 11. Jane Fonda, the actress who refused to stay quiet. Jane Fonda was born into stardom. With Henry Fonda as her father and a face fit for the screen, she could have coasted on legacy and looks. Instead, she became something no one in Hollywood had scripted, an activist. Fonda didn't plan to be controversial. Her opposition to the Vietnam War, her workouts, her political voice, they were all extensions of her convictions, not performances. Yet each act forced Hollywood to reckon with a new question. Could an actress have a mind, a platform, and still be bankable? She was branded a traitor, mocked by the media, and blacklisted in certain circles. And yet, her performances deepened. She won Oscars. She reinvented herself on screen and off more times than the industry could predict. She didn't seek to become a symbol, but by refusing silence, she redefined the modern actor as artist, brand, and citizen. 12. Sean Connery, the masculine ideal that wasn't supposed to last. When Sean Connery first stepped into the tuxedo of James Bond, he was rougher than the books had imagined, too working class, too unrefined, and yet utterly magnetic. He gave Bond a face, a walk, a cadence, and with that, he created a blueprint, not just for spies, but for a new kind of male lead, suave yet dangerous, sophisticated yet raw. Studios scrambled to replicate what Connery had crystallized, even while he tried to shake off the shadow of 007. Connery didn't ask to become the global ideal of masculinity, but the industry never stopped chasing his silhouette. He was never meant to be timeless, and yet his legacy wears a tailored suit. 13. Whoopi Goldberg, the rulebook never fit her. Whoopi Goldberg didn't arrive in Hollywood through the usual doors. She wasn't a model-turned-actress, didn't have a name to inherit, and didn't fit any of the industry's molds. She was funny, yes, but also deeply affecting. In The Color Purple, she broke hearts. In Ghost, she stole scenes. And on stage, on talk shows, in activism, she remained uncategorized. Hollywood never knew where to place her, so she built her own place. She became one of the few entertainers to win an Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony without ever sacrificing her essence. She didn't break the mold. She refused to acknowledge it. And that silence toward tradition, it thundered. 14. Meryl Streep, mastery without marketing. Meryl Streep never cultivated mystery. She didn't give scandalous interviews, didn't design an image. She simply acted with staggering consistency, clarity, and depth. Her performances weren't loud revolutions. They were quiet studies in control. And yet, over time, the industry began to shift. Casting directors stopped asking, "Is she bankable?" and started asking, "Can she act like Streep?" She turned the word serious actress into both praise and pressure, not through branding, but by being brilliant too often to ignore. She wasn't trying to raise the bar, but she made mediocrity harder to excuse. 15. Jack Nicholson, the rebel who didn't apologize. Jack Nicholson never looked like a conventional leading man. He grinned too wide. His eyes were too wild. He walked like he knew something you didn't. In 5 Easy Pieces, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and Chinatown, he didn't play characters, he exposed nerves. His performances felt unfiltered, dangerous, electric. Suddenly, Hollywood didn't need clean-cut heroes. It needed edge. Nicholson didn't campaign for rebellion. He embodied it, and in doing so, made space for actors who didn't fit the matinee idol mold but had fire to burn. He wasn't trying to lead a movement, but he made Hollywood admit it needed madness. 16. Rita Moreno, the accent they couldn't erase. Hollywood gave Rita Moreno an Oscar and still tried to erase her. Despite her brilliance in West Side Story, studios kept handing her roles drenched in stereotype. Island Girls, Spitfires, Never Equals. She played along at first, then she stopped. She vanished from the spotlight, waiting for scripts that didn't insult her intelligence. They rarely came, but when she returned, she did so with quiet force. Not to reclaim old glories, but to be the person she was never allowed to be on screen. She didn't shout for representation. She became the reason it existed, and in the silence of her stand, generations heard a path opening. Number 17. Christopher Reeve, the real superhero. Christopher Reeve didn't want to be typecast. After Superman, he sought smaller roles, darker scripts, anything to stretch his range. But Hollywood and the world refused to let him fly too far from that cape. Then came the accident, a horse fall, a severed spine, and Reeve, paralyzed from the neck down, faced the kind of narrative even films feared to tell. But he didn't disappear. He fought for disability rights, scientific funding, and visibility. Not because he wanted to inspire, but because he didn't want to vanish. He didn't aim to become a symbol of strength, but in refusing pity, he rewrote what heroism looked like. 18. Heath Ledger, the smile that wouldn't go away. Heath Ledger was always more than a heartthrob, but Hollywood, slow to evolve, tried to freeze him in teen angst. until he broke through with choices that confused critics and excited risk-takers. Then came Brokeback Mountain, and later, The Dark Knight. One film expanded what love could look like on screen, the other redefined villainy. Ledger's Joker wasn't evil, it was chaos wrapped in tragedy. And it changed what comic book films dared to be. Then he was gone. Too young, too soon. And suddenly, his work felt like prophecy. He didn't seek legend, but death handed it to him. And the silence that followed still echoes. 19. Johnny Depp, the oddity that became a franchise. Johnny Depp never wanted to be mainstream. He played drunks, misfits, hallucinations. He made choices that baffled producers and delighted weird kids. Then came Captain Jack Sparrow, a slurred pirate with eyeliner and limp limbs who became the face of a billion-dollar franchise. Disney didn't plan for it, neither did Depp. He thought he'd be fired on day one. Instead, he cracked open a door. Hollywood, once obsessed with handsome stoicism, had to make room for the eccentric, the surreal, the defiantly strange. He didn't want to define a generation, but they followed him into the weird. 20. Warren Beatty, the auteur they didn't see coming. Warren Beatty was the pretty boy, the womanizer, the tabloid target, but behind the Playboy image was a man quietly rewriting the rules. With Bonnie and Clyde, he didn't just star, he produced. He fought studios, reshaped editing styles, and ushered in the new Hollywood era. Later films like Reds proved he could craft epics with both heart and intellect. Beatty never branded himself a visionary, he let the work speak, and in doing so, shifted the idea of what a leading man could be, not just the face on the poster, but the hand on the reel. He wasn't chasing auteur status, but he became the reason studios feared actors with ideas. Bonus fact, Dolores Hart, the starlet who chose silence. She kissed Elvis twice. She had a contract with MGM, a face made for Technicolor, and a name Hollywood was just beginning to light up. Dolores Hart was on her way to stardom with the kind of momentum that launched legends. And then, she disappeared. No scandal, no burnout, no dramatic spiral, just a quiet exit. At 24, Hart left acting and entered a Benedictine monastery in Connecticut. She became a nun. Hollywood didn't understand. Directors were stunned. Tabloids spun wild theories. But the truth was achingly simple. She felt a deeper calling. Not to protest the system, not to escape the fame, but to surrender to something beyond the frame. Decades later, she would return to the Oscars, not as an actress, but as the subject of a documentary titled God is the Bigger Elvis. And suddenly, her story made sense again. Not as a rejection of Hollywood, but as a reminder that not all stories demand sequels. Dolores Hart didn't intend to critique the industry. She didn't seek legacy, but her choice left a mark, subtle, serene, and indelible. She walked away from the spotlight, and in doing so, reminded us what it means to choose your own script. They weren't rebels. They weren't strategists. Most of them didn't even know they were bending the rules until the rules broke. From silent exits to loud performances, from still gazes to revolutionary instincts, these stars rewrote Hollywood by simply refusing to fit in. Not with anger, not with ego, just with presence. And somehow, that presence outlasted trends, studios, even lifetimes. So now we ask you, which of these stars changed everything without meaning to? Or is there someone we missed, whose quiet defiance still echoes behind the curtain?